Hello, this is the third time that I'm recording this, so let's hope this actually works now that I'm not using Yuja. My name is Caden Kowal, and I am doing the extra credit opportunity for a presentation for XPhys by going over my intervention, which was a hybrid strength endurance intervention that focused on concurrent adaptations, had different performance outcomes, and also, I'm going to talk about the fatigue accumulation that happened in a collegiate hybrid college athlete, that being me. So, starting us off here, let's mainly talk about the SAID principle, which is the specific adaptation to impose demands. And this principle basically just says the body adapts to the type of stress placed on it, and if you're trying to get better at something, you have to train specifically for it. That's the whole point of this assignment, is that the idea is that we are imposing the specific demands on our body that we are trying to then adapt from. For aerobic training adaptations, by using mainly aerobic training, we'll increase our oxidative capacity, our mitochondrial efficiency, our oxygen uptake, and then also our type 1 fiber efficiency, because for the demands of aerobic training. And then for high intensity strength adaptations, we increase our force production, our type 2 fiber recruitment, and then also our glycolytic capacity. So using that same idea, now we go into neural versus aerobic adaptations and what the difference is between the two of them. That being that neural adaptations are specifically the adaptations we get through learning a skill, is the best way I can define it. They're not necessarily growing bigger muscles. They're not necessarily building a bigger gas tank that we can pull from for aerobic activity. But it's learning the skill of doing the movement better. So, according to the lecture, it stated how our motor unit recruitment will go up, our motor drive will go up, and we'll have a higher neural drive and a higher firing rate, and we'll have more coordination between muscles with a higher neural adaptation, aka learning the movement more. And if we go to an aerobic adaptation, low to moderate intensity endurance work helps promote this aerobic adaptation, which will help with fat utilization, increase the efficiency of our mitochondria, and capillary density and oxidative capacity. So again, whenever we're doing this aerobic training, which you'll come to see makes up a lot of my, around 80% of my total training volume, I'm increasing this aerobic adaptation. So, what is the goal of this intervention? That is simple. I am not a normal everyday gym goer. I do not have one goal. I am a hybrid athlete, as you can see with the Hyrox Chicago flag here. Which for my sport, that being Hyrox, DecaFit, even just running, I need to be able to do a lot of different things. This requires strength, being able to push a 500-pound sled, and being able to lunge and move it, and have a 500-pound sled move very well, and then also 100 wall balls with a 20-pound wall ball. Aerobic performance, being able to run a kilometer in between each station at a relatively fast pace, 8 different times for 8 kilometers total of running. I need aerobic performance. And hybrid race performance, being able to put all of that together to make myself a complete athlete. All of these three things together need to come together to any good hybrid program. But the problem is we need to be able to hit all of these without sacrificing overall work capacity. So we don't want to just, because hypothetically I could do a 15-mile run and then go and lift weights after it and just get the best of both worlds. But the actual reality is, if I do run 15 miles, most likely that's going to fatigue me too much to go and hit heavy weights. So this brings in the concept of concurrent training, which is, just to keep it simple, is combining strength training and endurance training within the same program. Most of the time when people talk about concurrent training, which is combining multiple elements. It doesn't necessarily have to be strength and endurance, but for this program, I am combining strength and endurance because those are the two most important aspects of my sport. The interference effect usually suggests that when we increase our endurance volume and have a high endurance load, it typically will blunt strength and hypertrophy adaptations, and usually especially with a high running volume, it usually impairs max force production. So, and the Wilson et al. Study found usually that endurance training modality and the type of training, such as high mileage used in the study, will greatly affect the amount of power output and hypertrophy and strength training that a person can do and recover from. So, why does that matter here? That's because this intervention wasn't like a typical program that you'll see somebody write to get better at running or even get better at high rocks. This program had several different training disciplines, the big two being our running and our threshold work paired with our lifting, but also had rowing, ski erg work, kind of CrossFit E-style Metcons, and then competition specific work, all paired throughout the week. So our hypothesis, the purpose is to evaluate whether this 7-week, because we started late, I did 7-week hybrid intervention would improve my maximal strength, my aerobic performance, and also hybrid competition specific performance, while maintaining a relatively high training volume of around 15 to 20 hours per week. So my hypothesis at first was that my aerobic performance and lower body strength would increase, if not at least maintain in the lower body, but upper body strength adaptations might be limited by fatigue accumulation and then just the recovery demands of placing so much load on my body. So, getting to participant characteristics. I am 5'8", 170 pounds, and I am very well trained. Around most of the time, my weekly volume is around, at the start of the training experiment, around 20 hours per week. That varied. I came immediately off of a row specific competition prep, so my volume was more so geared for that, but still very much high, very pretty high volume, all things considered. Baseline testing, my squat at the beginning of this experiment was 335, and that's barbell back squat, after mainly just doing front squat for a while, and front squat and lunging, not really doing any barbell back squatting. Bench was at 215, which is not an all-time best for me. I would like to get that up. Deadlift was 455, push press 185, and my all-out mile was right at 455, which was tested on a track. My baseline body composition. At first, these were the summations: 8.6 for my chest, 12.9 for my abdomen, and 11.3 for my thigh, bringing my total to 32.8 mm. So with all of that baseline data, how did I design my intervention? So first things first, when building out and balancing running and strength, the big thing we want to consider is our strength sessions and how we prioritize them. I opted for an upper-lower split where I would typically pair my hard running days with my lower body days. This might seem a little counterintuitive at first because you'd think, you're going to fatigue your legs before your heavy squats and your heavy deadlifts. But usually, at least from what I've found, my body would typically recover as one instead of getting really sore and then the day after a hard track workout expecting that my legs would be able to squat 315. Like, it just... My body usually responded well to pairing equal stressors on equal days. Let me just do a quick check here, make sure we're recording. All right, we're good. We're good. I'll cut that out. So how I set up my weekly schedule was around 4 to 6 running sessions per week. I typically like to have 2 to 3 hard running days. I would start every week with a threshold session. I started off with 3 by 8 minutes at threshold pace, which for me started at around 6 minute mile or less than that, always on a treadmill because of the weather. And then I would pair that with lower body lifting in the PM, and would usually hit a little bit of, would not usually, I would hit erg, which means ski erg and rower sprints at the end of it for 30 minutes in total of 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, and then a minute on, a minute off on each machine, 15 minutes on each machine. After hitting threshold that morning, that was usually my Sunday or Monday workout to start the week. And then I would pair my upper body lifting, depending upon how my schedule worked out. It would either be the day after that, I would run in the morning, again, usually easy, and then lift in the evening, and then have another recovery day after that, or I would put a recovery day in between each one. And when I say recovery day, I mean typically a longer or easy, low intensity aerobic piece. So, for example, around in this point of the training cycle is around 70% of my weekly mileage was just easy aerobic work. Most of it done on a treadmill just because of the weather for most of this training block not being that good, but was easy running. I averaged around 60 miles per week. So yeah. However, that being said, a little bit more specific to competitions, I would add in rowing, and I would also try and some weeks, depending upon if that was a week I was doubling up or if I had to do strength sessions in a different way, I would not be afraid of not necessarily doing upper lower, but just to make sure that I got in all the intensities for the weight that I needed, I would hit full body some week and then do double threshold days where maybe in the morning I did a track workout, but then over lunch before my next class, I hit a rowing workout where it was 2 minutes at a hard pace, 2 minutes at an easy pace, alternating between those different rates. But that was kind of more specific towards my rowing competition. But to cut it short, initially my training volume was around 20 hours per week, but as you'll see with complications and commitments that rose up, my training volume ended up averaging around 15 to 16 hours per week. So that is a significant drop off in training volume. But it wasn't necessarily due to me not doing any training. It was more so to me consolidating and really hammering what I do have, and then ultimately cutting out a lot more aerobic work. So with the strength focus, why I hammered my squat was I really wanted my back squat to go up. So every day, every week, start of the week, after an active recovery day was heavy squats after running intervals in the morning. I followed a very easy linear progression where I started off with around 70% for 5x5. I would then increase the weight, lower the reps, until we got to week 5, which ended up being the toughest week, where it was, I believe, it was 6 sets of 3 at 90%. And then the next week was a deload week before testing, which ultimately got me to that 335 squat, which wasn't even necessarily that much of a grinder rep. I probably could have gotten more, but just that's also the fun part about being a hybrid athlete. You're never really going full out in one thing for strength. You kind of gotta manage what you're doing. Bench, I followed the same progression scheme that I did for squat. However, as we'll see, I did not experience any growth or as much growth with my bench press as my squat, which I have a few hypotheses for, or a few like what I think are reasons why that didn't happen. But moving on, deadlift and push press, I both just kept at maintenance. Didn't do A lot of specific work for either one was just hitting both of them on their own days. Sometimes if I was lacking time that week, I would put deadlift and push press together, supersetting one after another in their own workout. That was a really good hybrid fitness workout. So now is when we talk about the real world stressors that also affected my recovery outside of just training. Obviously, I'm a full-time UNO student. I started off the semester being on campus around 4 days a week, give or take. 4 days a week because I coach a fit class. I coach fit at Monday nights, so I was there on Monday nights. But really, I had that day to kind of train and get caught up on homework. But as the semester gone on, I just ended up doing more and more because we added the Wednesday class, which meant that I had to be here Wednesday nights as well. I got another job working at Crave Gym, which meant that like time that I previously could have been training ended up me coaching other people. And I also ended up doing this year's melodrama. It was Cassidy Croft and the Treasure of Jesse James, which we are second night tonight. I ended up signing up for that, which obviously I'm never really training at 7 p.m. per se, but just that extra stressor, just all of that extra time on my feet, definitely did have an effect on my recovery. And also just the sheer amount of time that I did, just the sheer amount of competitions and even competing in the gym versus other people at Drip Athletic Club, definitely had an impact on my recovery. And also just my TDE, I averaged around 28,000 to even 30,000 steps a day. Obviously, a lot of that's from the running and from the training, but even walking around campus, it adds up, and it's stressors we may not factor in, but your whole body is one. You can't isolate one thing. So it's all of these definitely had a factor in to how I recovered from all the training. So just again, an example of what an actual typical Tuesday, Thursday looked like. Let me just check again, make sure we're still going. Okay, we're still going, all good. So I would wake up around 5 a.m. I would immediately eat and then go into my first training session. I always like to start off with a run. I just like getting the run done with, not saving it for later in the day. That session's usually about 60, 70 minutes. I'd eat again and then immediately go to my next class. Well, not next, first class. Then I'd go, say I did a rowing workout after that. Then I'd eat again, go to my next class. And then I'd commute to Elkhorn. I'd coach for 3 hours, and then I'd drive. And then maybe I'd eat when I get to Florence or eat right before I head out. Then I'd drive to Florence. I'd act for 2 hours and then drive home. As you can see, that's a lot. That is a very full day. It also leads to the days that aren't like this, meaning I'm completely getting caught up on homework in between my training sessions. There's not a whole lot of like recovery time where there's nothing going on. My recovery time in a way kind of is the acting at the end of the day because it's fun, but like there's no like traditional I am just doing nothing, because even on my off days from work and school, I'm doing homework and getting caught up and studying. So my body composition results, in terms of how I changed, I lost weight. I went from 170 to 166. My chest went down by 0.06. My abdomen went down by 1. My thigh went down by 0.8, bringing me down in total by 2.4. My strength results. My squat gained 25 pounds despite less body weight. My bench stayed the exact same. My deadlift added 5 pounds. And then my push press also stayed the exact same. Now the fun part, my endurance / competitive results. I set an all-time mile PR of 450, not even on a track when the first one was on a track, which if you ever run on a track in comparison to a road, complete 9-day difference. A track is made for you to go fast on. So I think I could even push this more to like a 440 on a track, but Time will tell. I'll have to test that. An hour 17:07 was my half marathon attempt. Broke my old PR by over 3 minutes. 59:44 for the early bird 10-mile race. I think it was like 9th overall, first in my age group, but nothing crazy, which I'll talk about. 6:33.5 for Creighton 2K row, which I even have this right here, was first overall at. And then for my first Decafit, which is a hybrid competition similar to High Rocks, I did get second overall behind a world champion competitor last year. So overall, what improved? It's very obvious. My squat strength improved, although we have to factor in that a lot of that's also just the neural adaptations from taking time off of back squatting and mainly focusing on other movement patterns, and then coming back to back squatting, having back squatted for a lot of my life and just being able to add more weight. I don't think it'll take me too long to get back to 405. I also had an improved aerobic engine. I was able to sit at threshold, which we say threshold, but really it's around half marathon pace for me, which a 5:53 mile. I was able to sit around that for a long time. I could hit that. It started becoming to the point in this training block where I was hammering that pace so much, it just became second nature. I would barely have to warm up before my threshold sessions because that pace became so comfortable. And I improved my rowing performance a lot. Last year at the Creighton 2K Row Challenge, I got 6:47, so improving my time by almost 14 seconds in a year, which, considering rowing is an add-on for me, not that bad. And my better strength endurance and race transfer just from all the work I am doing. It is being able to actually use that in a hybrid setting, because again, running is important for High Rocks, but at the end of the day, I'm a High Rockser, I'm not a runner. So, negative adaptations and fatigue. This is the important slide. Let me just make sure we're still going. Yeah, okay, we're still going, good. So some of the major limitations that happened with this is because obviously, before this, when I was hitting around 20 hours per week, I had more ideal conditions. And even though I just came off a wrestling season, I still was able to get 20 hours of training in a week just from having more flexibility throughout the week. Some of the major, the obvious one is that chronic fatigue accumulation. We don't necessarily realize it, especially like myself. Maybe it's better for me to say I don't necessarily realize how much everything I do in a day really does affect me. Having and stacking like 3, sometimes even 4 of those days where it's just one thing after the next, and you're training, and like rushing to get your food in, and just constantly your nervous system's just constantly in fight or flight the entire time. It's not really good for being able to express peak performance. You have one nervous system. When we train, it's fun, but we do activate fight or flight. So in order to recover from that training, you need to get out of fight or flight and activate that parasympathetic nervous system. And when I'm going immediately from a training session into class, where if I'm struggling, maybe I don't understand the class, and if I didn't have a good training session that day, maybe I'm in a bad mood, and then go and coach and I'm yelling at people, maybe I'm not really calming down until later in the day. And fatigue management and reduced recovery, I'm normally really good about trying to mindfully calm down, but just admittedly this semester was a lot. So actually like having all of these life stressors in the way definitely had an impact on my recovery, even just from the mental side of it. And the way I noticed this was later in the training block, after accumulation of a lot of weeks with those heavy days, I would notice late into workouts and late into a few races, I just had no juice left in my legs. That I normally that's when I would pick it up, being a person who liked to negative split where we go faster at the end. But for example, during the Decafit, which was my last competition, I think like 3 weeks ago at this point, early on in the race, I held strong at a 5:45 per mile in between each station. But late during the race, I actually dropped to a 6:30 and 7-minute mile. I think my last lap actually ended up being slower, which again, Decafit, it's very similar to High Rocks. There's stations you're running in between, but ultimately it's not as long as a High Rocks. So that's not a good showing for me as a High Rocks athlete if during a Decafit I'm struggling to hold on to that pace. But ultimately I think that's just a good showing of the fatigue. So if we take an actual physiological interpretation of this, why lower body might have improved is, again, those neural adaptations. I was doing a movement pattern I haven't done in a bit that I'm good at. I really like back squat too. I'm always motivated to train back squat. Just getting more motor unit recruitment, greasing the groove, getting back into the zone of back squatting. My body, of course, loves that. It's going to respond and easily increase the weight. Having a high aerobic work capacity and threshold adaptation, hammering thresholds every week, sometimes a lot of times multiple times a week, and then stacking just time in that zone just made going to that half marathon and even the work I did on the rower just feel easy by comparison. Like I've truly never felt fitter in terms of that in-between zone. Like obviously I'm like, you can see with my mile time, I'm not the fastest guy in the world. I'm not someone who can redline and just hold on that good. And at the same time, I'm not like I'm not a guy who's out here crushing marathons, but that in-between zone, that's where I, especially as a hybrid athlete, dominate. So that brings us to the question, why did my bench increase? Likely contributor is just the fact that bench press kind of got the short end of the stick in terms of what I prioritized. I had the same progression scheme. I wanted to increase my bench press the same way that I wanted to increase my squat, but I was usually only benching once, maybe twice a week. I know bench press usually needs volume to grow, but putting bench press usually later in the day after a long day, or like rushing to get it in between sessions, and being fatigued from the day before with squatting, or sometimes the day before with deadlifting, or even like a hard running interval, just bench press usually got the short end of the stick in terms of recovery. This is where we talk about the interference effect. Having those hard days because again, being, a natural athlete, like I only have so much recovery, and with everything else I'm doing, I can put in the perfect progression scheme for bench press, but due to the fact that I'm just working myself so much overall, I lost weight, which also means my bench press is going to go down. And like, I kind of theorized it at the beginning, which is weird to see it literally proven right. It's almost kind of funny or like scary how accurate my starting prediction that my bench press would go down despite all the volume, or at least maintain, actually happened. So what are some practical applications to here? Obviously, hybrid adaptation is possible. You do not have to limit yourself to just training for one thing. Just go ahead and make sure again that this is going well. Okay, cool. Sorry that I keep doing that. So key takeaway, hybrid adaptation is more than possible. I think that it's the way everybody should be training. If you put all your eggs into one basket, you're just going to be a lot less well-rounded versus, especially for the average person, being able to do a lot of different things also just keeps you motivated. You don't have to be putting in 15-hour weeks in order to get that adaptation. So you can get a lot of the benefits from, 5, 6, 7 maybe hours a week. But that's because recovery resources do matter. I was eating 4,500, sometimes 5,000 calories a day most days, and was still losing weight just from the sheer activity level that I had and the lack of recovery time. even when I was quote unquote recovering by studying and focusing my brain in other ways, wasn't really entering into that parasympathetic nervous system to allow my body to recover. And the big one is volume alone does not necessarily always guarantee progress. I actually found later in the training block, I felt way more run down than at the beginning of it, just from that accumulation of volume. And only getting deload weeks really the week that I trained, or not trained, competed. So it just had an effect on me, obviously. And the big one is concurrent training, whether you're attempting to go to the Elite 15 like me in High Rocks, or just trying to start adding in running after your lifting sessions, does require strategic fatigue management. You can't just get away by being on your feet all day long and expecting your body to be able to perform at a high level in multiple disciplines. It's just it makes sense, but at the same time I'm saying this out loud because I've also had that happen to me, where I have a busy day and I'm active all day long and try to go to get a workout in afterward, and it's just like, oh, there's no energy left to use. So and also real world stress does affect your gym and your running performance. It takes like growing up to actually realize this, because when we're little we have all of these our lives like a lot more simplified. So yes, you can do all of this and be relatively active, but as I grow older, only 21 now, but still relatively older, this and recovery does matter. So in conclusion, this intervention did successfully improve my aerobic performance. I improved my lower body strength. My rowing performance also improved, and I was still able to achieve some pretty good competition outcomes. However, I was tired all the time, had chronic fatigue. I lost weight unintentionally, and had experienced several recovery limitations that ultimately led me have to consolidate aerobic work in order to hit all of my strength movements and all my intensities for the week, which also likely impaired the upper body strength adaptation and my ability to actually express my peak performance. And in terms of my references, we have the article from Sports Medicine about chronic adaptations to eccentric training. We have the article from the European Journal of Applied Physiology and Occupational Physiology about the interference of strength development. Strength development by simultaneously training for strength and endurance. We had the Scandinavian Journal of Medicine and Science and Sports, quantifying training intensity distribution in elite endurance athletes. And then we had the article from Journal of Strength and Conditioning Resources, just going over concurrent training, the difference of aerobic and resistance exercises, putting them together, seeing what happens, and the training adaptation and lecture specificity slides. So yeah, thank you.